Bob Savikinas. Welcome to our program in a nutshell. Today we're very proud to talk about a new documentary that's going to be premiering. It's about the wholesale block that existed in Lackawanna County, specifically on Lackawanna Avenue, Scranton. The documentary is titled Stories from the Block, and today we have two very special guests with us, Jay Rosenstein and Mr. Doug Fink. Welcome, gentlemen, to our program today.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, sir.
Happy to be here.
Thank you both for being here. I guess I'm going to start off with something very simple to ask the question. Mr. Rosenstein, I'll start off with you. What was it like with the wholesale block? What family stories can you relate to us?
Well, there were an awful lot of characters that walked around the wholesale block, okay? And there was a lot of them that were begging for food, money, whatever you could give them, all right? And nothing was, there were no high-low jacks. It was all hand trucks and your back that you were doing the bulwark with. And I believe I remember that my grandfather, or my father, he was approached by a gentleman begging for some money, but my father knew he was faking it. So he just chased him around, chased him out. My grandfather said, "Why'd you do that?" He said, "Well, I knew he was faking." And he said, "Son, here's a lesson, listen carefully, okay? You may think that he was faking, but the one person that knows it for sure is himself. So when you're not sure, if you think he's faking, you give. Maybe not near as much, but you give. Because the person who really needs it your way wouldn't even get it." So that's a lot to do with the beggars. And of course, next door to our place on Lackawanna Avenue, we had a restaurant. And down the end of the block, there was another restaurant. And I think they were just covers because both places were bookmakers. So there was an awful lot of, this was way before the lottery, okay? And there was quite a bunch of characters. People played numbers, they did this. It was a lot of different kind of people all together.
We also have Mr. Doug Fink with us. Doug, what are your recollections or knowledge of the wholesale block?
So I was a little too young to directly experience the wholesale block, but when I was 3, we moved from Lackawanna Avenue over to our present home on Vine Street, Pennsylvania Paper and Supply. And my grandfather had a business on Lackawanna Avenue, and my dad for, at that point, 50 years. And lots of stories, that a very, very colorful place. Lots of comings and goings. I think lots of fruit from Rosenstein Produce went to my grandfather and my dad. But it was a very enjoyable, colorful time, and they always spoke of it very fondly.
And so for our viewers that may be not that familiar with it, I mean, the wholesale block basically existed from probably the 1870s up until about the 1970s on Lackawanna Ave. And we had railroad cars that would bring in produce, tobacco products, paper products, office supplies, or office things like that. And this documentary was put together. We have 11 interviews, and you gentlemen are both included in this. Again, just trying to give a little background information. But specifically then, so Jay, your family's business, what was it on the wholesale block?
Well, our customer base was supermarket chains, big-time processing places, and we had a lot of jobbers. All right, a jobber is someone who has a truck and he comes down and he buys whatever he thinks he needs, and he's got his small customers, some that we wouldn't even be interested in selling to, but altogether it amounted to an awful lot of business.
And we have one of your crates from your business. Can you explain what that would have been?
We had a packing house up in Newton, Pennsylvania, okay? And we had about 120 acres that we grew. We didn't own them. We leased the land from the farmers. We planted, and we had a tomato season, and the pickers would pick all the tomatoes and put them in a box, okay, and lug it over to some truck, right? And I don't know how many migrants were working, but when they filled the truck up, they would back it into the warehouse, okay, and they would dump one by hand on the conveyor belt, taking out the bad ones, taking out something that's too small, because if you had a big tomato like this, okay, that went here, a little smaller, and there was something, you know, you can sell a number 2 tomato. It can be ugly as heck, but when you cut it up and put it in a salad, it lost its identity.
Okay.
So we had a good time up there, and we ran the packing house, I believe, for about 20 years. And come around 1968, we broke ground for our new warehouse back on Kaiser Avenue. So we had also owned a building next to Mr. Fink's. It's called the D&H building, the Delaware and Hudson building. Okay, that was older than us, but my father had renovated it. It was an office building, and he rented it to the state, and that was interesting. But there were an awful lot of characters. What can I tell you? They were just
Interesting
outstanding.
people.
Very,
Interesting
very
people.
interesting people.
Well, so it sounds like the produce end of it was covered partially through the tomatoes, which your family business seemed to have been. I know we interviewed, I believe it was 11 people for this documentary, and we heard the stories of bananas, we've heard other produce stories, we've heard the tobacco products that were brought in as well. Doug, so fill us in a little bit on your family's part of what the wholesale block meant to your business.
My grandfather started Pennsylvania Paper in 1922, and primarily we supplied grocery bags to mom and pop grocery stores. And that was the core business for a bunch of years. I remember stories, of course, only 8 years later, the Great Depression hit. And they would say that they would not have enough money to pay people to unload the boxcars of paper, so they would give them a shot of whiskey and $1 for working for the day. And that was, and probably a tomato.
So it sounds like your family's business is intertwined a little bit and everything. Are there any fun stories that your family members may have passed on to you of both your businesses that you interacted with each other, going back to how many generations or decades or whatever that may be?
Well, I can remember going to Team Track. Team Track was an area right behind Penn Furniture on Lackawanna Avenue. There might have been 25 or 30 railroad cars. Okay, maybe 8 or 10 belonged to us, 8 or 10 belonged to Notoriani, 4 or 5 to somebody else. And we used to take a truck, open the door, back the truck against the railroad car, set up rollers. Like I said, there were no forklifts or anything back there. So it was, you would have a carload of cantaloupes piled from the floor all the way to the ceiling, and they were probably weigh about 90 pounds apiece. So you were picking them up, putting it on a roller, roll it into the truck, hand stack it. So however long that took, we would get back to our own store, back it in, and we would set up a roller system, and we had refrigeration in our basement. We had a couple of coolers. So we would literally unload them by hand, stack them up in the coolers, and then my uncle was famous for, he said, okay guys, I just sold them to the A&P, so we had to unload them off the thing and load them on the truck again and then deliver it. I mean, it was just crazy. Now when we got to the new warehouse, we unload it on a pallet jack comes, puts it away, you're done. Okay, we were working until 5:30 in the afternoon, from 5 o'clock in the morning till 5:30, and we would be beat. Up there, we were busy as heck when we opened, and we were done by 11 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so we had a lot of room to grow, but good stories, good people.
And it shows, again, the hard working ethic that existed back in those days when people really did do a hard physical day of labor. Doug, any stories that you'd like to recollect?
It was built on physical labor and hard work. That the work ethic that my grandfather and my dad's generation had. Something seems to be lost a little bit today. It doesn't seem the same. But I remember, the adversity that we faced. My grandfather actually fell down an elevator shaft on Lackawanna Avenue in 1930, and lucky to live, but broke his back. He spent a year convalescing with 3 young children and a young business, and we're actually very lucky to survive between that and the Depression. But they came back. It was perseverance and hard work and lots of energy, and just day in, day out, 6 days a week, other than the Sabbath, of course, and they got it done.
Again, it's amazing. We started this documentary about 1.5 years ago, my video partner and I, Tim Novotny, and we did this documentary on behalf of the Lackawanna Historical Society, and of course they preserve the records and history of Lackawanna County and everything, and just the stories that came out, but they're very similar, in which there were so many unique individuals that worked at the wholesale block that were a part of it, in addition to all the businesses that were there and everything. But you know, as time goes along, obviously the businesses change and everything. But again, I'll go back to you, Jay. So, what has your business evolved from for how many generations to what it currently exists as? Still in the produce business, I believe. But if you care to tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. My grandfather initially started it with his brother-in-law, Louis Strauss. That was in 1915. 3 years later, okay, my uncle was old enough, and they bought Louis Strauss out, so the name became William Rosenstein and Son. My father was younger, then he went off to war. He was in the Marines, and when he came back from service, he went to work for his father, and they just added an S onto the name. Now, he was second generation. My brother Phil and I were third generation. All right? My brother has one son, and I have two sons that are currently in the produce business. And believe it or not, I have a 27-year-old granddaughter who's working with her father. So that's 5 generations. And like I said, we survived because we were flexible. We sold anything from A to Z. Okay, so I say apples to zucchini, all right? But whatever anybody wanted, we would reach out and make sure that they had. And we had a reputation for having excellent quality, and that counted for a lot too.
Obviously, 5 generations you're into now, and the family continues in the produce business and everything. So that's a wonderful story to hear. And you know, we captured some of that in this documentary. Doug, I think most people will know the Office TV show, Dunder Mifflin and everything. Tell us about how, you know, the origins of the wholesale block end up with Dunder Mifflin and the Office and everything, and of course the cultural iconic show that has become, of course, the Office.
Sure. So we started, obviously, very small, humble beginnings. My dad, when he got out of the Army in 1946, came into the business. He was second generation and added facility supplies, janitorial supplies to the mix of packaging, and grew that through the 80s. I got involved in the business. I grew up there. So third generation, I was running around, rolling down the ramps and playing in the warehouse from a very, very young age. But I started seriously working at about 18 years old in 1985. And we took advantage of some opportunities by doing some acquisitions. There was a former D&L Supply and Paper Sales, and we purchased their company. And then there were 3 or 4 others over the next 20 or 30 years that we kind of rolled up. And then in 2004, kind of out of nowhere, got a call from NBC, Reveille Studios, and they said, we're making a show about a paper company in Scranton. And I said, all right, who is this really? Because nobody makes a show about a paper company in Scranton. You're putting me on. They said, no, really. And they said the new lead who was just cast in the show, his name is John Krasinski. He's a waiter in New York, wants to come out and interview you and your people, take the footage back to the writers. So he came out, spent a few hours on site, and took the famous photo of our tower, which is the opening title sequence of every show of The Office.
How do you feel as being part of this legacy, whether it's dating back to the wholesale block, or I'm sure people all the time will say, like, your business is affiliated with The Office, that, again, famous TV show. How do you feel about that?
It's serendipity. You know, somebody's got to hit the lottery, I guess, so why not be us? But it also overshadows the fact that we survived 100 years and made it through 3 generations, which is very, very low chance of that occurring. I think the statistics are 0.5% of businesses survive that long, let alone in the same family ownership structure. So we're very rarefied air, and then The Office was a really, really nice ride and a lot of fun. We have people coming from all over the world continuously, literally on a daily basis, who come in and want their picture taken. We have a nice shrine to The Office, so if you're around, stop by.
Jay, I'll ask the question, how do you feel the legacy of your family now in 5 generations in the produce field, produce business, and it continues to thrive and survive and everything for you? How do you feel about that legacy?
Well, I actually am quite proud of my children and their children. It did very well financially, and the irony, I have a 22-year-old grandson who I think is going to break the mold, because in May he graduates from Penn State University and his major was filmmaking. So I don't know if he's going to stick around or not, but that's okay. I've known people for 50, 60 years, and now I ask for somebody, said, oh, he died, who's this? Oh, I remember meeting you when I was 5 years old, and this and that. I mean, we have conventions every year, okay, in the regular convention towns, whether it be Orlando, New Orleans, San Francisco, San Diego, of course, don't forget Las Vegas, okay? And we have a couple shows that we go to every year, so people get to be pretty close.
So let me ask the question then, both of you businessmen and everything. I mean, Scranton has survived and really done well the last several years and continues to be a very vibrant community and everything. We go back almost 100 years with the wholesale block in which your family businesses were a part of that thriving community, and we fast forward 100 years later approximately, and it's still a surviving and thriving community. What do you see as the future of Scranton and northeastern PA, Lackawanna County? Doug, I'll kind of start with you then on that.
It's very interesting to see it evolve and become what it's growing into. Scranton was the major industrial site, the first industrial city in the world in the 1800s, and had an incredible run up until the coal bust. So we've been in recovery mode for a long time, but the last 10 years, it's been amazing to see the area evolve more into an education, medical community, and technology is also growing. Artists, a big artist community has moved in, and I never thought that I'd live as long as I have to see the wait list for rental units in Scranton be as long as it is. I think there's a demand for 1,000 units over the next 2 or 3 years. So, if you live long enough, you see everything, right, Jay?
Goes around, comes around.
Right.
And
Exactly.
Jay, your thoughts on how things have developed in the city and in the area in general, Lackawanna County and everything?
Well, I thought a real big deal was when the mall moved into town. They put an awful lot of businesses out of business because you used to have people walking the streets, and all of a sudden there's not too much street walking, okay? And then with the pandemic and everything, it hurt the mall. Now they have an awful lot of it rented out to Geisinger, to another Lehigh Valley. But the city itself, over the last 2 or 3 years, has actually grown. And the reason I say that is because there was an awful lot of people that lived in New York. Well, we're only a couple of hours away, and they all had permission to work from home. So why should they pay New York rent when they can come to Scranton for 1/3 of the rent? So there's an awful lot of people, and I know some people were called back to work in New York in person. They said, I'm not going back, I'm working from my house, or else I'm going to get another job. New York City is a tough city, and you learn an awful lot. There's great parts and there's not so great parts, but Scranton is a small community. I don't think we have tons of crime. We have our share, but for the most part, the people are pretty nice people.
It is a very good community. I'm going to go back to talking about the documentary. The origins started, and very proud to say that former Scranton Mayor Gene Peters approached us about the wholesale block idea, so I want to thank him for inspiring us to do this documentary. But how do you both feel about being a part of this historical document on the documentary of the wholesale block?
Very proud, and it's a way of communicating the legacy not just to my children and grandchildren, but great-grandchildren. This will be around in digital format for centuries, and a descendant at some point is going to want to do some research on their origins and hopefully come across that and realize that we had a lot a lot of great people who did a lot of hard work to make their lives easier.
Jay, thoughts?
Well, like I said, it's a very nice community to grow up in. Okay, you don't have much crime at all, and the people are friendly. All right, I mean, for the most part, you really don't have any major problems. All right, once they get the tax situation underway. But I think for the most part, the good way outweighs the bad. So I think the city has a lot to look forward to.
Well, it has a lot to offer just based on the businesses, the hard work ethic, and just the good people that are in our community and making things happen and everything. I was very proud to do this documentary on behalf of my company, Cannon Fire Productions. I've been doing this documentary work for a while now. This is actually my 10th documentary, so I'm proud to say this is the 10th one. The Lackawanna Historical Society will be presenting this documentary on Friday, April 21st, and it will be on Lackawanna Ave, where the Wholesale block existed. I would suggest our viewers to call the Lackawanna Historical Society Catlin House or email them for more information about it. But gentlemen, again, any last thoughts on the Wholesale block as we wrap up?
Again, we're proud of our part to try to leave the community and the world a better place than we found it. My family's done that over the 100-year period, and certainly the Wholesale block, from humble origins and humble beginnings, become great character, and we're proud to be a part of it.
Thank you. Jay?
Well, it's like a fraternity. When you get into a fraternity and you're a pledge and they teach you this, that, and everything else, and they also abuse you, okay? Working as a young man, I was 8th grade, 9th, 10th grade, all down the Wholesale block, and it's like you can't believe how much business actually got involved there. Now, I mentioned before that we serviced jobbers, who then in turn went out and resold it to whether a small restaurant or whoever. Okay, but believe it or not, that's where I met my father-in-law. My father-in-law, okay, was a jobber. And to end up with a woman whose father was in the produce business is like, it was deja vu all over again. Right? And the facts were known, I mentioned to Doug before, but my mother-in-law worked at Pennsylvania Paper. And my wife, my beautiful wife, used to babysit for Doug.
So the family connections and stories of the Wholesale block continue on. So again, I want to just proudly say, the documentary is going to be out there, the stories from the block. Look forward to people coming out to see it, contacting the Lackawanna Historical Society, enjoying an office tour, enjoying good produce through Rosenstein and Sons and everything. But I want to thank you both, again, Jay Rosenstein and Doug Fink, for being our guests today on the program. I'm Bob Savikanis. Thank you for tuning into our program in a nutshell, and please seek out our next documentary on Stories from the Block about the Lackawanna Wholesale block that existed for almost 100 years. It's a great story, and we've preserved more history of our founding area. Thank you, everyone.